Hello, my name is Dan and I make competitive Warhammer 40k content. Today we're going to be going over the top 5 tips I have to improve at Warhammer 40k. My first tip is to accept responsibility for your losses. I think far too often we like to blame things like my opponent's OP codex, or bad dice rolls, or the mission, or the terrain, or anything else besides ourselves when it comes to why we lost. I'm going to just throw a couple kind of facts at you. So I play Blood Angels, and currently Blood Angels are not doing so hot. If you look at Warhammer 40k Stat Center, you can see that they have a less than 40% win rate. And I could use that as an excuse and say, hey, I lost because Blood Angels are bad, and their codex is bad, etc. But guess what? One of the top players in the entire ITC plays Blood Angels and continuously seems to win with them. So at what point do I have to say, hey, you know what, maybe the codex isn't so hot, but at the same time, people are clearly able to win with it, and I shouldn't be using that as a crutch on why I can't win. In the same vein, we shouldn't blame dice. I'm sure many of you have seen my advanced 2d6 dice math video where I talked about this, but basically the conclusion was, and I won't derive it here because it takes about 10 minutes to do, but only about 1 in 5 games will your average dice rolls be about 5% lower. In a game with zero strategy, you would expect the best player and the worst player to still beat each other about 50% of the time if it was just complete luck. Now, in a game like Magic the Gathering, the best players in the entire world max out at about a 65% win ratio. And that means that, there is a little bit of luck and a little bit of strategy, right? And then in a game like chess, you might expect the best player to win 100% of the time. Of course, it's not actually that perfect, but I think you understand what I mean. What do you think the win percentage of the top tier ITC players in Warhammer 40k is? It's actually close to 80%. In fact, the person who got the highest ITC rank last year in 2020 had something like a 95% win rate over almost 40 games. So sometimes you have to ask yourself, hey, if it's clearly possible that other people can win almost every single game they play and can take factions that I play and do much better than me at them, maybe there's something more going on besides just pure luck. So it's okay to acknowledge that your codex isn't good or your dice rolls weren't that hot, but do not let that be the only takeaway from a game on why you lost. Tip number 2 is to consume better Warhammer 40k content. I did a poll where I asked people how often they got to play games, and you can see that very rarely do people play, more than a couple times a month. In fact, a large portion of you guys aren't even playing consistent games. So how can we get better at Warhammer 40k if we're not playing enough games? Well, I think that there's a lot of good options in terms of content that we can watch and learn from. But a lot of the content online isn't necessarily good or useful for teaching. Let's face it, any schmuck like me can get a webcam and a microphone and then just start recording content. But that's not really what I mean. There's a lot of great entertainment content out there. I personally love watching like 4-hour bat reps while I'm painting and modeling and doing things like that. And there are some incredible bat rep channels that produce high quality and entertaining videos. But I would not suggest anybody to watch battle reports in order to get better. You're not really going to be able to condense those 4 or 5 hour videos into a few key takeaways. It's also really hard to learn what a faction does if you're going in and out paying attention to it as you're trying to do something else like hobby. So what I recommend you do is watch channels that are specifically dedicated to tactical content or specifics about other armies. I'll link a few below of things that I personally like to watch myself. Of course, I'm biased and think that I make decent content, but there are many more content creators out there who I think produce even higher quality videos than myself, and they produce content about armies that I simply don't know enough about to make videos on. They say people come to YouTube for 2 reasons. Number 1 is to either get entertained, or 2, find an answer to their problems. So honestly ask yourself, is this video that I'm about to watch for entertainment purposes or for getting better at Warhammer 40k? I think more often than not, a lot of those videos like bat reps and things like that are for entertainment rather than actually solving a problem. Tip number 3 is to play more games and practice more. Now I know this can be really hard because many of you said you don't get consistent games or only play a couple times a month. Warhammer 40k is a skill and requires practice. One of the most difficult parts about getting good at a game like Warhammer 40k is that it can be so hard to play games. I mean, let's take a game like League of Legends, for example. I mean, I hate that game. Okay, I haven't played it in years, but bear with me here. How many games do you think the best League of Legends players play? I mean, if they're playing a game every 30 to 45 minutes for 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, that's a lot of games. It's also incredibly easy for them. They just hit join match and all of a sudden they're practicing. For people like us who are playing Warhammer 40k, we have to find somebody else who wants to play, at a store that's still open, drive all the way over there, play this game, hope it's worthwhile, and then we get to drive home. So it may take almost 5 or 6 hours out of your day just to play one game. And that's not even including all the time you spent painting and modeling to even get to play that game. So I realize it can be hard to get those specific games, so you have to take advantage of those practice games when you get them. You don't need to play an entire game to know you've lost sometimes. Let's say you're playing a practice game with a friend and you totally forgot one of his rules and he beats you on maybe turn 2. Like, the game is totally over. You don't have to keep playing out those last 3 turns. You can just say, hey man, you got me, you played really well, I didn't know about that. Would you mind restarting on turn 1 so I can maybe pick different secondaries or deploy differently or play around a certain rule? You can get many more practice games in as long as you're willing to kind of cut the cord early when you already know you've lost. Triathletes don't run a triathlon every day to get better at triathlons. I know it's kind of a silly example here, but you don't have to play super precise at every practice game you play in order to get better at tournaments. Sometimes all you need to do is sit down and have an honest conversation with your opponent like, hey, what do you think is the best secondary against your army? How do you think I should deploy in this type of matchup? What is your strategy going forward? I truly believe that some of the best practice games you can get are through talking with your opponent the entire time. Yeah, of course that's not how you're actually going to play at a tournament, and you should practice playing on a chess clock, etc. at some point, but I think there's a lot of value to be gained in having a conversation throughout the game with your opponent on what they think is the right play, how you can counter them, etc. Because at the end of the day, you both want to get better, and the way you can do that is by talking with each other. And like we talked about, it's hard to get physical games right now, and there's kind of a big buy-in you need to do to even play a single game. I just made a video last week with another content creator, the Sandman, where we just sat down and talked through all the pre-game things that happen before a game even starts. Essentially, we went through all our secondary choices, deployment strategy, and we kind of just talked to each other about how the other person could win against the other person. I felt like I learned a lot about Genestealer cults, and I never rolled a single dice against him. That whole exercise also only took maybe 30 or 40 minutes to do. So one thing I highly recommend doing is finding a group of friends and people you respect, a community of people that are willing to help each other, and do exercises like that with them. Which brings me to my point number 4, which is join a positive community that's willing to help you get better. I'm a little biased on this because I have a Patreon where everyone who supports my channel gets access to a Discord, and we'll go through some of those exercises together and talk with each other on Discord on the weekends. But there are plenty of local game stores that have their own Discord channels or Facebook groups. There's also numerous Reddits and Facebook groups out there about competitive Warhammer 40k. The only thing I caution you about, and I know this because I've posted content on some of those channels, is that sometimes people can be a little rude and don't really have your best interests in mind. So I just recommend that you're a little careful with how you spend your time and your effort. There are plenty of online communities out there where people talk about Warhammer 40k, but that doesn't mean they're saying anything that's either useful or true. There's also a reverse to this as well. You want to surround yourself with people who take the game seriously and want to improve, and sometimes that means kind of cutting away people who are negative influences on you and your game. There's no need to put anyone on blast here, but I think we've all played a game before where we thought, this is not fun, this is not useful, and I don't want to be here. But our time is valuable, and Warhammer games are long. We don't want to spend 3 or 4 hours playing against someone that makes our life miserable, so just don't do that. It's okay if someone asks you if you want to play against their homebrew 4,000 point Chaos Space Marines army that everything has 3 wounds. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. tip number 5 is going to be a little different and probably a little controversial for a lot of people here as well. There are some content creators out there who want to put out drama and want to put out controversial statements for the fact that it gets them a lot of views. Warhammer 40k is a little bit pay to win, I will acknowledge that, but it is not nearly as pay to win as some people would have you believe. Tip number 5 is don't feel like you have to chase the meta. As we talked about in tip number 1, some factions are going to be slightly more stronger than other factions, and the numbers are going to show that. We cannot deny that. Also, there are certain units in factions that just seem better than others. If you wanted to buy what is widely considered as the best army in the game right now, you'd have to buy about 200 Adeptus Mechanicus models. That would cost you $1,000 or more. Then you would have to glue and paint all of those things before you could even play a game. And if you remember from tip number 1 that Blood Angels aren't doing so hot right now, well, here's a video from Tabletop Titans only a few months ago where they were telling me that Blood Angels were the best faction in the game. So if Blood Angels can go from one of the best factions in the game to one of the worst factions in the game in only 6 months, what do you think is going to happen to your meta army if you spend $2,000 on a whole Adeptus Mechanicus army, spend the hundreds of hours it takes to paint it? Where is that army going to be in about a year? I can tell you that Games Workshop likes to take units that were underpowered at one point and then make them overpowered later. The conspiracy is that they do that to sell more models and sell models that weren't good before. I think that's possible, but it also could be that, they want models that didn't have a chance to shine. I will say, though, that when I was putting together my Thousand Suns Forge Fiend, I had the option between autocannons and these ectoplasm cannons. And I knew that autocannons were best in 8th edition, so I put ectoplasm cannons on them because I figured, you know what, Games Workshop is probably going to make the ectoplasm cannons the best choice. And I think they are, too. So do not chase the meta. Just stick with your faction, your favorite faction, buy all the core models, and slowly grow it over time. I guarantee you that your faction will have its chance in the sun, and you want to just be able to take advantage of that when that happens. Then you want to try to get as many practice games in and good practice as you can with that army. You might not be able to play a bunch of games, but if you can play one list at least 5 to 10 times, you will be much better off with it. And it can be really hard to learn what all the other factions can do, like unpopular factions like Genestealer cults. And I recommend that you go to reputable content creators on YouTube who are making educational videos and watch those videos to learn more. And then as you go through these games, do not blame the dice rolls or your underpowered codex. And if you lose, ask the person across from you, hey, what do you think I could have done better? And then shut up and listen to them. Not everything they say is going to be useful or accurate, but please ask someone, hey, what do you think I could have done better? Then cut through the chaff and figure out the kernels of truth on how you can actually improve your game. So those are my 5 tips on Warhammer 40k. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all those other things, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Fight for terror.